The Bobby O Show.
Welcome to another edition of The Bobby O Show. Today's show is going to focus on a topic that I'm not that knowledgeable about. And as those of you who watch my show know, that I enjoy doing shows that are a little bit off center of what I know about. We all work hard for our money. We all work hard to try to save money and to invest for money so that we have the money in a rainy day. And we all have different tastes for investments, different tastes for budgeting, different approaches to how risky we want to take in our investments, how conservative we want to be in our investments. And there are people out there in the world who are expert in the field of financial planning, financial coaching. And I have a close friend of mine who has a theory about two aspects of money, money at work and money that you work to make money yourself. So there's investment money and there's money you do from working. And we have today with us Bill Donaldson, who is an expert in the field of financial planning and coaching. And I went to a webinar of his and found that he has a very interesting approach to how to determine people's willingness and incentivization of how they want to risk their money and invest their money. And we're going to hear a presentation from him today in a give and take discussion as to how he determines the approach people can take on investing money and budgeting. Bill, welcome aboard.
Hey, Bob. Happy to be here.
My pleasure to have you on, Bill. Give us a little background about yourself so people can understand your expertise and your background so they can understand where you're coming from and how you might approach investment or helping them as a coach in helping them spend their money appropriately, budgeting their funds, and also know how to put money aside for that rainy day.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a bit of an evolution, I'd say. I started out just the mainstream training for financial planning. I became a certified financial planner 20 years ago now. And that's just training on how to invest and how to save, and talks about, insurance and estate planning and retirement planning and all those things. And then you go off and you help people with those issues. But what it doesn't teach you or train you is how to deal with people's relationship with money and their behaviors toward money and their habits and all that stuff. And what I found over the years, and just to add to the background, about 19 years of my career have been spent in the divorce world, which is how you and I know each other, helping people through all those complicated transactions and all the questions they have about their future and how much money they're going to need, all of that. So it was in that work, especially when I'd work with, either party who didn't normally take care of the finances in the relationship. And then after the divorce, they were pretty much forced to deal with it. And a lot of anxieties and fears would surface because they normally would just ignore it and let someone else deal with it. And that worked fine as long as the relationship worked. But as soon as the relationship breaks down and they're on their own, it's pretty scary. So when I was dealing with people in that situation, I found it was very difficult for them to just follow a plan. Just hand them a budget and go, just do this and you'll be fine. Save this much. And it's very difficult to pull the trigger on those.
Bill, what you're saying is very important because I do, as you know, a lot of divorce representation, and it's obvious common sense, which is that people take different roles in a marriage.
Yeah.
And one person might be more involved in the children's school issues. Another might be more involved in working. And when you have a marriage in which people have, I wasn't the one, Bob, who I don't know what the checkbook's all about. I don't know where investments are. That person's at a disadvantage in terms of discussing financial things. And that's where someone like you is very helpful. We do a lot of what they call collaborative divorce, which is not the topic for today's show, but that's where you have, as one aspect of it, one financial person, for example, will help both sides. And when you have one side who's not that knowledgeable about finances It's not that they're not smart, it's just that they have different acumen, different
Yeah.
skills. And so, Bill, you're going to talk to us a little bit about how you help people who, even if the person knows a lot about finances, they may have very different risk-averse activities. And so let's talk a little about how you go about analyzing how you can best help a person, no matter which side of the aisle they are in terms of well knowledgeable about finance or not, how you decide what's the best approach you might take to helping that particular individual.
Yeah. So it was the understanding that, I'm not helping people to the extent I could because I can't get them past their fear. So I discovered money coaching. It was actually like 2016. I discovered a money coaching program that addressed that, and I felt like I struck gold because that was the exact thing I was looking for. This is how I can really help people just work through their fears and objections and blocks and emotional, triggers, et cetera, around money, because everyone has a different relationship with money. And I can get into that a little bit when we go into the presentation a little bit more. But it's first identifying what their relationship really is with money before I can really help them. So just as you said, they might have no experience with money and no interest in money. And that's a certain type of money behavior that's common. And then knowing that, it gives me the tools I need to help them overcome those issues. In the presentation I did with you guys, I had you actually take this quiz to identify what your primary money behaviors are, just for fun. And you did it and came up with some what we'll get into later, the archetypes of money. That helps me as a planner know which direction to go and how I can best help them.
Let's go to the slide. Let's go to the slideshow, Bill.
Yeah. All right. So we can skip the first one because that's just an intro slide. And this is just kind of funny, but to talk about money and our relationship with money, you really have to go back to the beginning, before there was money to worry about. We didn't have to have money. We just went out and foraged or killed whatever we needed. And we survived through those times with that primitive fight or flight response. So when that, saber-toothed tiger came around the corner, your body could do what it needed to do to avoid that problem. So let's go to the next slide. We don't have that same kind of threat today. We don't have to worry about, wild animals around the corner. We're blessed to live in a place where we're pretty safe from physical danger. But people still have reactions and fears about things, and money is definitely one of them. So when someone feels fear of either I'm not going to have enough money to pay my bills, or there's fear about I'm going to lose my money, any of those fears, we still have that primitive brain. We still have that fight or flight response, and it's for a good reason, because once in a while we do need to, run or fight or whatever. This doesn't happen as much as it used to, but that's still there. So what happens is when people are triggered by fear and they go to the fight or flight response, they end up making bad decisions about money.
Or about anything, not just
right. It could be any
decisions. I walk every night just about, and one night I was walking and there was a black bear in Richfield, Connecticut.
Yeah,
that gave me a little fight or flight theory. But
yeah, sure. That's a big creature. So let's go to the next slide and talk about the brain a little bit. So that reptilian brain, which is really the brain stem, as you can see in this illustration, the sort of yellow color, that's where we start. And that's really all we had to operate with back in those days of prehistoric time. And then we evolved. The second brain was the emotional brain, the limbic brain, and that allowed us to store memories and understand emotions and work with that, which is a little bit better. And then what we call the third brain, which was the most modern brain, is the decision making, the neocortex, or the logical brain. And it's pretty obvious when you're making decisions about money, you really want to be operating from the logical part of our brain so that you can make rational decisions, weigh pros and cons, all that stuff, rather than just react out of emotion or out of instinct or fear. So so go to the next slide. Okay, so when we do feel this fear or anxiety about money, we're really just running on patterns, patterns that have been conditioned into our brains. And those patterns were put in there. And I like to use the analogy of a computer. When you get a brand new computer, it doesn't really have many programs. It has an operating system and a few things that make it work. But, just like a new person, our brains are pretty simple. And then they get programmed over time. And the person or people who program our minds, for the most part, are primary caregivers. So that's the next slide that talks about that. And there they are. Usually it's mom and dad or whoever our primary caregivers are. And God bless them, they try and they want to do the best job for their kids most of the time, hopefully all the time, but we know it's most of the time. But they have programming too that they're operating from their parents. And sometimes the programs that they either consciously or subconsciously pass down to us aren't healthy. They'll say things like, money's the root of all evil, or money doesn't grow on trees, and all these things about work and money and things that they learned and they were conditioned from their parents, and they pass it along. And
Bill, that's a very important issue you mentioned, because, for example, I grew up in a family. We had a bakery business. We had the oldest bakery in Connecticut, 57 years, from 1907 to 1974. And I grew up every day in high school. Every Saturday night, I worked at the bakery, and I learned how hard work yields results. If you don't work hard, you don't get the money that you need.
Yeah.
And I think when you gave us the test that we're going to talk to you about in a few minutes, my background is what my background is. Yours is what yours is.
Mm-hmm.
And the viewers are what theirs are. And it's often hard to change that perspective. Am I correct in that regard?
It really is, unless you want to change it. But first you have to know that it even needs to be changed. A lot of times we're just running these programs unconsciously or subconsciously and just acting on them, and then wondering why we're having challenges. Why isn't this working out for me? Or why do I struggle so much around money? It's really just operating programs, and you can't really beat yourself up too much.
Next slide. Let's go to the next slide.
Yeah. So next slide. So these patterns, a lot of these patterns are universal in nature, and they fall into the different categories that we call archetypes. And Carl Jung was sort of the pioneer of using archetypes in his work. And this is just a slide showing different types of archetypal, different archetypal characters that you probably recognize. One of Jung's archetype is the hero. So here's Iron Man as the hero archetype. And the film industry and the advertising industry and, books, they all use archetypes in their stories. You have the wizard, you have, the outlaw, like Jack Sparrow. And all these are archetypes that make stories, great. But
Bill, is Carl Jung's the person who came up with this approach, the archetypal approach?
He's a pioneer. Yeah, archetypes no one invented the archetypes. They're just a fact of, human nature. It's part of the collective unconscious that he identified. Now, not everybody agrees with Carl Jung's work, but a lot of people do. So he's a pretty remarkable man. So now the person who created the money coaching program that I took this because she discovered, her name is Deborah Price, and she discovered the same kind of thing. Like, she worked with a lot of different clients that showed similar types of behaviors around money, and having a psychology degree and understanding archetypes from studying Carl Jung, she realized these people are having such similar, traits around money. These seem like archetypes, and she created money types, archetypes that are specifically around our, attitudes and behaviors around money. So she calls them the money types or the money archetypes. So let's take a look at those on the next slide. So she came up with 8 archetypes: the innocent, victim, warrior, martyr, fool, creator, artist, tyrant, and magician. And each one of these has a bunch of different traits that, make them what they are. And so what we did, Bob, in that presentation is we took a quiz that would identify your primary and most active money archetypes.
Yes, and Bill, and what happened, and just by the way, the group he refers to, it's a divorce law group in Darien, Connecticut, a bunch of lawyers and other professionals who deal with divorce law cases, mostly the collaborative method, where you try to work things out more appropriately. And without telling us in advance why he was doing what he was doing, he gave us this test, Bill did, and we filled it out not knowing what the result was going to be. And then once he did that, we then went back and he discussed, okay, now you're going to fit into one or another category. And most of us laughed because, at least for myself, I think I fit in the category that I thought I would fit in. And had I filled the numbers intending to do that, I would have ended up where I was, if that makes sense. So tell us how, Bill, once you ran the test, and these are the categories you talked about, how would you then use that information? Let's suppose, for example, I'm a warrior. Maybe we could go to the slide that shows what the warrior category is. The question I would have is how to use that information as part of your decision making. So can you go to the slide? Let's go.
It's a few down. It's a few.
Let's go down. Let's talk about the warrior person and tell us how you get to determine in your review of the test results how a person fits in and what it means to be a warrior.
Well, Bob, what it means to be a warrior is you don't need my help. Because the warrior archetype is really what we're all striving to be. However, I'm certainly not in your situation, but in some cases, and especially where we work in Fairfield County, there's a lot of warrior archetypes, but it goes a little bit too far, and they become a warrior and achieve a lot of success. But then what happens is that success is never enough. It's never good enough. And they keep going, and they keep striving for higher and higher goals and more and more and more. And they just don't ever find it because it doesn't exist outside of themselves. That's like the number one truth to this coaching process is you're not going to find your true happiness by material things. They work for a little while, but they definitely don't last for long. Because once that goal is accomplished, and I've heard it said, I thought 5 million was going to do it, but it didn't. So I guess it must be 10 million. This is coming from clients I've worked with.
Bill, why don't you go pick out one of the categories of a person who most is in need of your.
Yeah. Well, let's go up to the first one, back to the first one. So back a few slides to the innocent. Yeah. This one I come across a lot. And we talked about this a little bit before. The person that didn't deal with money in the relationship because they didn't want to, suddenly in a divorce situation, they have to. And even during the process, they have to make decisions about their future. And they really would rather just have someone else take care of it. So these are the qualities of the innocent. They're trusting. So they're happy to let someone else take that role. They seem happy and well-adjusted and everything on the outside, but inside they're really fearful and anxious when it comes to money. Remember, these are just regarding your relationship with money, not just just your character overall. They're pretty indecisive. They have a hard time deciding what they should do. They are dependent on other people to help them repress feelings and beliefs, specifically about money. They don't want to admit that they're fearful about it. They don't want to cause any ripples, non-confrontational, seeking security. They feel powerless. And the ostrich approach to money is just what it seems to say, is head in the sand. They just don't want to deal with it.
And Bill, you made a very good point, and that is the fact that someone might be, quote, the innocent or might be the warrior doesn't make any value judgment of that person in any way, shape, or form. It's really the connection to money. If you did that kind of testing result on, let's say, connected to school involvement, you might get a flip-flop. So it's not a pejorative judgment. Exactly. It's to help you analyze, right?
Yeah, the warrior might be avoiding other things. They might be terrible in relationships or something like that. But the warrior and the innocent are a really good match because the innocent doesn't want to do it, doesn't want to deal with it. They want someone else to. They're trusting. And the warrior comes in and goes, I'll take care of it. Don't worry about a thing. I've got you. And it works great until it doesn't work anymore.
Right. Big critical point, until it doesn't work. And how many cases, Bill, have we seen in which you have the innocent and the warrior, for example? The marriage is going well. They all have their different roles. And then all of a sudden things are not working. And then you go to the divorce process. And then maybe the innocent now, now's my opportunity to fight back, which I haven't wanted to do. How do you deal with that kind of situation when you have the innocent with the warrior, for example?
Well, the innocent, the key here is I like to work with couples together in this, because the more they can understand where each other are at regarding money and why they're there, that's the important thing. There's so much resentment, as you know very well. We always have those cases where, one party resents the other because they spend too much, or maybe it's the other way around. The other person is just too cheap and too tight and doesn't spend anything. And they just get mad about it because they're not the way they want them to be, rather than understanding why they are there. And so I spent a lot of time with either an individual or a couple digging into their past, digging into their childhood. And I have them write down an actual autobiography about their money relationship. And there's a lot of aha moments in there. They start talking about their parents and situations in their life. And also like, oh my God, now I understand why I'm this way. And then,
Bill, so essentially, what you're saying is, when you're involved in a divorce or any other kind of situation, you might get a family planning situation where people are happily married and they're discussing numbers, and you still have the dichotomy. But it's your role to, as I understand it, is to understand the different perspectives about money and finances of each person, and try to then help them together and alone sometimes, but together, trying to work out, okay, since your goal is X, sir, and your goal is Y, ma'am, how do we help you try to find a plan that works for both of you? Am I saying it correctly?
Yeah. So with a couple, it's helping them understand where each other are at, and then developing a plan that's going to help. I have a couple right now where I'm having them, meet together every week to talk about what's going on with the money. In this case, the wife has just never really wanted to deal with it, but yet it caused anxiety. So it's like, well, you have to find a way to deal with it so that you can avoid the anxiety. You have to overcome the fear of dealing with it, so that you can overcome the anxiety too. And it's been helpful. And the husband wants to help. He wants to, share that. So they've committed to working together and bringing her, as she can, slowly into the money conversation, and actively being involved and paying some bills and just building her confidence. It just takes work. But a divorce, that's not going to happen. They're on their way out. So then I have to work with the individual, and kind of the same thing. Start with it's breaking habits, or creating new habits. And that's not easy to do.
No, it's, we've talked a little bit about collaborative divorce, and today's show is not about divorce itself, but since we mentioned the topic, there are different methodologies for getting from the point of, I want to get a divorce, to having divorce be achieved.
Yes.
And one process is collaborative divorce, where you have essentially each side has a lawyer, and you have meetings not in the courthouse typically, but you have meetings at a lawyer's office or a financial planner's office. And you'll typically, in that situation, you'll often have a financial coach or planner to help the people on these issues. And oftentimes we as lawyers will say it's okay for the the financial coach or planner, to meet with the clients separately without the lawyers in the room, because there's no reason to have us all together. And so when Bill is talking about collaborative divorce, et cetera, that's an approach is being taken that gets you from the point of divorce is filed to divorce ends. And Bill, as a planner, will help them work together. And people are surprised. And the lawyer's not always there? No, the lawyer's not always there.
No.
Let's go to the category, Bill, that you'd like to point out.
Sure. Yeah, let's go to the next one after this, because that's another common one. So the next slide, which is the victim. This one is a little tricky, because the victim, it's someone who's been hurt in the past. They've had, somewhere in their history, they've had some negative things happen. And that that makes them blame other people. They feel resentment toward it. They're usually pretty emotional, and it becomes part of their identity. What happened to them is kind of who they become. And what makes it difficult to work with that person is they have to be willing to let go of that story. They have to be able to let that victim mentality go and take responsibility for their own financial future. And that's not easy. Not everyone's ready to do that. So this one is also, I find it fairly common. There's a lot of similar characteristics to the innocent in terms of feeling powerless, wanting someone else to help them. But the resentment and unforgiving nature, I mean, you've seen this, I'm sure. A lot of blaming happening, a lot of anger. It's a highly emotionally charged situation, especially in a divorce. And I know Bob and I keep referring to divorce because that's what we do for a living. And that's where most of our, situations come up. But it makes for a harder, conversation to have, a harder process when a couple is splitting. And when I come up, an individual that's a victim isn't going to look for help in this. They're not ready.
Bill, we only have about 2 minutes left in the show, and unfortunately for this show, the webinar I went to with Bill was about an hour and 15 minutes, and so there's a lot more categories we'd get into. And Bill, I'm going to invite you back to discuss it again. But I think if in the last minute or two, I'd like you to just, if you have any pointers that you might want to give out to people, and that is if you're someone who is a little bit reluctant to make decisions on money, what advice might you give that person to try to help them become more involved in an understanding and less frightened of investing and budgeting?
Yeah, that's a good segue into just telling people not to be so hard on yourself. Understand that these are programs that you've been running for a long time. It's from childhood. It's learned behavior. It's conditioned. So it's not easy to change that, but the first step is to become aware of it. So when you're struggling with a money situation or decision, just sit with it for a minute and be like, why is this so hard for me? What is the emotion here? And give yourself a little bit of a break, but also don't fear asking for help. Reach out, look for some help, someone that can work with you, someone that can help you just prioritize things.
And Bill, if there's someone wants to learn more about this concept of but financial coaching, we have like 30 seconds left. Just real briefly, tell us your website where someone could read about this topic of financial coaching.
Yeah, sure. So it's DonaldsonFWN.com, and that's Donaldson, F like financial, W wellness, and network.com. And I have a bunch of stuff on money coaching in there, as well as other things I do like the divorce work. But there's some good resources there. There's a lot of books out there. There's so much help that's
great.
out there.
And Bill, I hate to rush us now, but I think what's really important is that you're obviously very knowledgeable, and you can see how calmly Bill discusses these financial issues. And I think anyone who talks to someone like Bill would be very well served in that regard. This has been another edition of the Bobby O Show. Bill Donaldson, thank you so very, very much for your knowledge. And I will have you back again to go into more detail of some other issues. This has been the Bobby O Show. Have a great day.